I never imagined there would come a day when, right in the middle of a room glittering with crystal lights, surrounded by hundreds of voices and the clinking of glasses, I would be pushed into an abyss by my own daughter with a single cold and merciless sentence. Clara's promotion party was held at a 5-star hotel in the city center. The moment I stepped through the revolving glass doors, I was nearly overwhelmed by the lavishness, a lobby lined with red carpet, rows of tables draped in spotless white cloth, candles flickering against crystal glasses. People wore shimmering gowns and finely tailored suits. I, in my old faded lavender dress, holding a bouquet hastily bought from a roadside shop, suddenly felt small and misplaced. I froze at the doorway, the shrill laughter echoing in my ears. A few glances brushed past me, curious at first, then indifferent, as though I were just a maid who had wandered into this luxurious place by mistake. I took a deep breath, tightened my grip on the bouquet, and stepped forward. I told myself, I didn't come here to stand among them. I came here to congratulate my daughter. Clara was standing in the middle of a small stage, bathed in a brilliant spotlight. She was beautiful, radiant in an emerald designer dress, her hair in a neat bun, lips painted a vivid red. She held a champagne glass, her smile flawless, the air of someone who had conquered the world. Looking at her, I was filled with pride. All those years of hardship, night shifts as a nurse, selling pastries at the market, everything to raise her and put her through school. At that moment, I thought, maybe it had all been worth it. But that pride lasted only seconds. When Clara's gaze swept past me, the glow in her eyes suddenly vanished, replaced by a flicker of unease, then by coldness. She raised her glass higher, her voice sharp and clear through the microphone, and let out a derisive laugh. "Ah, my mother is here tonight as well. To be honest, she shouldn't really be here. I only sent her an invitation out of pity." The words fell, heavy as stone. The hall instantly went silent. The clang of a spoon hitting a plate rang out, painfully loud in the hush. I felt dozens of eyes drilling into me, curious, pitying, disdainful. I stood frozen. My chest tightened, breath snagging in my lungs. My hands trembled so badly the purple petals of the bouquet quivered. In my head, only one word echoed, pity. My daughter had used that very word about me, in front of everyone. I bit my lip hard, forcing back tears. I mustn't cry. Not here. Not under these watching eyes. From behind me, whispers rose clearly. Is that really Clara's mother? They don't look like they belong together at all. She must be poor, just look at that dress. Clara smiled, a contemptuous smile, then turned away and went on clinking glasses with her colleagues as if I didn't exist. At that moment, it felt as though someone had dumped a bucket of ice water over me. My whole body went cold. I looked down at the bouquet in my hands, those cheap little purple flowers so pitiful among the lavish gifts piled on the banquet table. Suddenly I thought of the embossed invitation card I had cherished for weeks. I had believed it to be proof of my daughter's appreciation. Now I understood, it had been nothing more than a token of charity. I clenched my purse tighter. Inside was the savings book I had brought with me. My original plan was, if she looked happy, I would secretly give it to her as a surprise gift, some capital for her to build her future. But now that book felt unbearably heavy, like a stone crushing my palm. I said nothing. Silence. But in that silence, a spark flared inside my mind. A decision was being born. I turned and walked slowly out of the hall, leaving behind the whispers, the music, the laughter. Each step drained me, but at the same time helped me catch my breath again. When the door shut behind me, I paused. In the glass, my reflection stretched long beneath the yellow lights. My face bore the weight of exhaustion, but in my eyes I knew something new was shining. No longer blind pride, no longer submissive endurance. But resolve. For me, the party had ended within minutes. Yet Clara's merciless words had carved a wound that would never heal. And I knew, from that very moment, I was no longer the silent, long-suffering mother. I returned home when the night had sunk deep. The suburban road lay deserted, only the wind whistling through rows of bare trees. My old wooden house appeared in the darkness, quiet like an aged companion. Peeling paint on the walls, warped window frames, moss-stained tiles on the roof, everything wore the color of time. But it was the only place I still felt I belonged. I switched on the kitchen light. A dim yellow glow spread across cracked walls, across the dining table worn down by years. On the table, I set down the wilted purple bouquet. Looking at it, my chest tightened. I pulled out a chair and sat, my hand instinctively reaching for an old photo frame at the corner, Clara in her graduation gown, her smile bright and wide. I remembered crying through that entire ceremony, out of both happiness and sheer exhaustion. The images in my mind rewound like a film. I saw myself back then, hands shaking as I still carried a tray of pastries to sell at the market after a night shift at the hospital. Dark circles under my eyes, legs aching, but every time I thought of Clara, I gritted my teeth and endured. I remembered every meager paycheck, every envelope I tucked into that savings book, just to make sure my daughter lacked nothing. Clara had once been so obedient. The day she was chosen for a school camp, I bit back my own needs, skipped buying myself new clothes, scraped together the fee for her. When she wanted a bicycle for school, I sold the only pair of wedding earrings I had left. During her college entrance exams, I took extra shifts at the hospital, nights when I nearly collapsed over my desk. But in return, I believed she would have a different future, bright and worthy. I picked up the photo, stroking her face. But now, all those sacrifices lived only in my memory. To Clara, they seemed never to have existed. Lately, she only came to me when she needed my signature. The last time, her voice had been sugary sweet. "Mom, could you co-sign for me to buy an apartment? It's just for tax convenience." And I believed her. I wanted my daughter to have a proper home, a luxurious place to live, because I thought that was the reward she deserved after all her years of study and effort. I had placed my blind trust in her, not realizing I was handing my entire fate into the hands of someone who only knew how to calculate. My hands trembled as I set the picture frame down. Tears welled up and spilled over, but this time I didn't wipe them away. I let them fall, just to remind myself that I could still feel pain. From the drawer, I took out Clara's wedding photo. She and her husband were radiant that day, and there I was in the corner, smiling softly. I held the picture for a long while. Then, with a sharp crack, I snapped it in half, keeping the side with my own image and discarding the rest. The act pierced my heart, yet it brought an odd sense of release, like I had just severed an invisible cord that had bound me for far too long. I walked over to the small safe where I kept my most important belongings. The key jammed a little, and I had to twist hard to open it. Inside were neatly stacked old folders. I pulled out a bundle of yellow documents, property ownership papers, the deed, and the co-ownership agreements I had once signed. I sat down, spreading the papers across the table. My eyes stopped at the bold print, co-owner, Clara Smith. My whole body went numb. Each letter was proof of my blind trust. I thought I had agreed only to make tax matters easier, just as Clara had told me. I hadn't realized I had placed a knife in her hands. I poured myself a cup of tea. The porcelain pot had a long crack running through it, the tea dripping slowly like a wound that would never heal. I lifted the cup, inhaled deeply, and wondered, I've given my daughter so much, would there ever be a day when she returned even a little affection to me? The house was silent, broken only by the ticking of the clock. In that silence, I realized, it was time to wake up. I could no longer let the past or blind love lead me to ruin. I stacked the documents again, but this time I didn't put them back in the safe. I placed them neatly on the table as a reminder that I had to face the truth. My eyes lingered on those cold, heartless lines, then slowly closed as I whispered. I don't need gratitude. I just hope you don't erase me. Outside the window, the wind rattled the old curtain. I knew a storm was coming, not only outside, but inside my life. And I had to be ready. The next morning, I couldn't sit in that old house any longer. Those co-ownership papers laid out on the table felt like knives aimed at my chest. I knew if I kept avoiding reality, sooner or later both the house and my small savings would vanish into Clara and her husband's hands. I slipped on my worn purple sweater, wrapped a scarf around my neck, and stepped outside. The narrow road leading to town still held the morning mist. I headed to the cafe where Camila, my longtime friend, always met me. The cafe was small and warm, filled with the scent of roasted coffee and pastries. Round wooden tables were neatly arranged, each with a tiny vase of fresh flowers. I chose our usual spot by the window. Camila was already there, her silver hair neatly pinned, glasses slipping down her nose as she stirred her cappuccino. She looked up, her kind smile breaking out, yet her eyes quickly stopped on the gloom on my face. "What's wrong, Harper? You look like you've just come from a funeral." I sat down, wrapping my hands around the steaming cup set before me. The warmth rose up, but my heart stayed cold. I told her everything from Clara's promotion party and her cruel words, to pulling the co-ownership papers out of the safe. My voice trembled, but I forced myself not to cry. Camila listened in silence, nodding occasionally. When I finished, she set her spoon down, looked straight at me, and said bluntly, "Clara doesn't need you, Harper. She only needs your signature." The words cut like a blade. I lowered my head, fingers tightening around the cup handle. Camila went on, "You raised her, gave her food, an education, a start in life most kids never get. But now, she treats you like an ATM. When she needs money, credibility, someone to sign her papers, she comes to you. Otherwise, she erases you from her life." I swallowed hard. My friend's words were harsh but painfully true. I remembered every recent call from Clara, no questions about my health, no concern about how I was eating. Only, "Mom, sign this for me, Mom, I need this urgently, Mom, it's hard without you." Camila slid a napkin across the table, a phone number scribbled on it. "This is Attorney Harris. He specializes in asset protection. You need to see him immediately, Harper. Don't sign a single thing again, do you hear me?" My eyes blurred with tears. "But, she's my daughter, Camila. I just can't." Camila cut me off, her tone firm. "Harper, being needed isn't the same as being loved. Do you understand? She's exploiting you. If you don't wake up, one day you'll have nothing left but debt." I froze. Her words struck like a hammer. Being needed isn't being loved. I had confused them for too long, convincing myself that every time Clara came to me it was out of affection, when in reality it was only calculation. My hands shook, and at last, I broke down. The tears I had been holding back since last night poured out uncontrollably. But within them, for the first time, I nodded with resolve. "All right, Camila. I'll call." Camila smiled, gently patting my hand. "That's it. Let someone else help you. You've carried her on your shoulders all her life, now let the law carry you once." Rain began tapping against the window, steady as a heartbeat. The golden cafe lights glowed, illuminating my trembling hands clutching the cup. In the chill of the morning, I felt a small flicker of warmth, a fragile spark of hope. I wiped my tears, pulled out my phone, and hesitated for only a few seconds before firmly dialing the number Camila had given me. The ringing stretched through the silence, each tone matching my pounding heartbeat. "Hello, this is the office of Attorney Harris," a secretary's voice came on the line. I took a deep breath, my voice shaky but clear. "I'd like to schedule an appointment. My name is Harper Smith." I knew, from that moment, my life was turning onto a new path. No longer silent endurance, but silence in preparation for a fight. A few days later, I walked into Attorney Harris's office. The space was nothing like the stifling air of my old house: high ceilings, dark wood-paneled walls, shelves lined with thick legal tomes. The scent of old paper and ink filled the room, heavy and severe, pressing on my chest. I sat across from the large wooden desk, clutching my handbag as if it were the last piece of courage I had. Attorney Harris, a middle-aged man with graying hair and steel-rimmed glasses, opened the folder I had brought. He flipped through each page, his sharp eyes scanning the lines swiftly. The room was utterly silent, broken only by the rustle of papers and the ticking clock on the wall. "Mrs. Harper," he finally said, his deep voice precise, "this isn't a small matter. Do you know that Clara has already used her co-ownership rights to mortgage the apartment for an additional loan?" My heart dropped. I shook my head, choking. I had no idea. She told me it was just for tax convenience. Harris slid a folder across the desk toward me. "Here's a copy of the loan contract. Clara signed it as a co-owner. If she fails to pay on time, the bank has every right to seize the apartment. And since your name is on it, you'll be held responsible too." I grabbed it, my eyes fixed on the cold numbers. The debt was enormous, more than I could ever pay off in my lifetime. A chill ran down my spine. It felt as though I were being buried alive in sand, and the only hand I trusted, Clara's, was the one shoving more dirt over me. Harris straightened, his tone firm. "If you don't act immediately, your entire savings will be swallowed. And you, not anyone else, will bear the debt." I sat in silence. His every word fell like a hammer, painful yet awakening. I had let blind love guide me for far too long. At last, I spoke in a hoarse but firm voice. "Mr. Harris, please help me. I want to revoke all the rights Clara is holding. I will not allow her to turn motherhood into a shield for debt anymore." Harris nodded, pulling a red seal from his desk drawer. He pressed it firmly onto the petition for asset protection. The sharp thump echoed like a gavel striking, awakening me. "We will file this with the court and request a temporary order to safeguard your assets. In the meantime, I'll dig deeper. I have a forensic accountant. We need to know exactly what Clara and her husband have done with the money flow." I trembled slightly. "You said, dig deeper." "That's right," Harris replied. "I fear this isn't the first time Clara has taken advantage of you. I just received information that she also plans to open more credit cards under your name. We need complete evidence, not only to stop her now, but to protect you in the long run." I sat in silence, clutching the straps of my purse. The image of Clara, beaming on her graduation day, flickered in my mind before giving way to the hollow smile she wore at the promotion party. I whispered inwardly, "My child, how could you be so cruel?" Harris gathered the stack of files, then looked at me. "Mrs. Harper, prepare yourself. This won't just be a legal battle, it will be a battle with your own heart. But if you don't move forward, you'll lose everything." I nodded, for the first time in my life feeling a steel resolve rise within me. I stood, staring at the pile of documents still open on the desk. Those words and numbers were no longer just contracts, they were proof of betrayal. And somehow, I would turn them into weapons to defend myself. On the way home, rain began to pour. Heavy drops beat against the bus windows, blurring the world outside. I leaned my head against the frame, Harris's words still echoing in my mind. They turned motherhood into a shield for debt. I exhaled, but in that breath lay determination. I knew, from this day on, I would no longer be the mother who only stepped back. I would be the woman who stood up, protecting her own life. 3 weeks after our first meeting, I was once again sitting in my old living room. But this time, on the table there wasn't just a photo frame and a cracked teapot. In front of me sat the laptop Harris had lent me, its blue screen glowing, displaying endless columns of figures. On the other side of the screen, the forensic accountant, a young man named Daniel, was explaining every detail in a calm, clear voice. "I've reviewed all the joint accounts you and Clara shared. At first, the withdrawals looked small, just a few $100s at a time. But they appeared regularly, every few days." His cursor slid across rows of numbers. On the screen, I watched the money trickle out of the account, funneled into a credit card under Clara's name. These small amounts might not look alarming, Daniel continued, but when you add them up, here, see for yourself. He scrolled down, and the numbers suddenly spiked into tens of thousands. My chest tightened, breath catching. Every dollar I had painstakingly saved over the years was now nothing more than cold, vanishing digits gone without my knowing. Daniel didn't stop there. He opened another file. And this is the real concern. There are larger withdrawals, tens of thousands moved into a venture capital fund. The manager of that fund is none other than Clara's husband. I went numb. So it had all been a perfect play. Clara had borrowed the guise of love, borrowed my credibility, to fuel her husband's ambitions. My sweat and tears, the money I had scraped together from night shifts and a pastry stall, had become the capital for their reckless game. I also found a very familiar pattern, Daniel said, his voice dropping. It's called bleeding gradual siphoning. They take small amounts, over and over, so the victim doesn't notice. By the time they realize it, the account is nearly empty. I couldn't hold back any longer. Tears streamed down, falling onto the laptop's keyboard. I whispered. Every small dollar was a drop of my blood. Daniel was silent for a moment, then said. We have clear evidence. I'll send the full report to Attorney Harris. You no longer have to suffer in silence, Harper. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. When the call ended, I sat staring at the dark screen, Daniel's words still echoing. I stood, dragging the old printer from the corner. Its grinding sound filled the room as sheet after sheet slid into the tray, covered in bank statements, charts, records of money bled away. I gathered them, clipped them into a brown folder, each page heavy as stone. Placing my hand on the stack, it felt like resting my palm on open wounds. But unlike before, this time I wasn't holding the pain just for myself. I knew I now had weapons. As the sunset filtered through the window, I opened another email Daniel had just sent. It contained a short note. Clara is preparing to open her own company, with family capital as the foundation. I let out a bitter laugh. Family capital. Those two words cut like a knife. What family? To Clara, family was nothing but a shell she could drain dry. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the table, watching the stack of freshly printed papers rise higher with each page. The pale desk lamp threw my shadow long across the wall. I felt like an old, worn-out silhouette, but for the first time, within the darkness, there flickered a light. The light of determination. The next morning, I carried the entire file to Harris's office. Setting the heavy folder on his desk, I heard the thud echo, as though my pent-up anguish had been laid down with it. Harris picked it up, his eyes sharp with gravity. Very good, Harper, he said firmly. This is everything we need to proceed. With this evidence, the court cannot ignore us. I nodded. I've kept silent too long. No more. Harris smiled faintly, but his gaze remained steely. Be ready. I'll file the formal petition this week. I clenched my fist, feeling clarity like never before. Clara may have grown used to my silence, my weakness. But she would never expect that this silence had been turning into a hidden blade. And when the time came, that blade would be drawn. A week later, Harris called me to his office to hand me a thick envelope. He slid it toward me, his voice low and steady. This is a court summons. The lawsuit has officially been filed. You must prepare yourself, Harper. I looked down at the paper stamped with a glaring red seal. Each line of text cut into my mind like a blade: petition for asset protection, invalidation of Clara Smith's signing authority. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from knowing that the real battle had begun. Harris continued explaining, the preliminary hearing will take place in 2 weeks. In the meantime, we've secured a temporary restraining order. This means Clara cannot touch any assets that are jointly under your name. I heard every word clearly, my heart pounding. Part of me still couldn't believe my daughter was being named as a defendant in court. But another part of me exhaled in relief. Finally, there was a wall to block the endless bleeding. That afternoon, Clara received the summons. I wasn't there, but Harris later told me she merely scoffed, tossed the papers onto the table like scrap, and said just one sentence. "You think you can beat me, Mom?" Hearing those words over the phone pierced my chest. So this was what all my sacrifices, my youth, strength, and love had amounted to, a scornful laugh and a challenge. I bit my lip and stayed silent. But I knew I was no longer alone. The next day, I saw Clara again. She came to my house without knocking, shoving the door open as if she owned it. On her arm swung a designer handbag, the sharp perfume she wore overpowering the musty scent of the wooden house. She flung the summons onto the table, her eyes blazing. "Do you really want to make such a big deal of this? Do you know what the press will say? You'll be mocked, called a cruel mother who turns against her own child." I stayed seated, saying nothing. Instead, I placed the thick stack of bank statements I had printed the day before on the table, sliding them toward her. Each page was like a stitched wound, now laid bare for the one who inflicted it. Clara snatched the stack and flipped through a few pages. Her face faltered for a moment, but she quickly masked it with a smirk. "These numbers don't prove anything. I'll find a better lawyer. We'll see who wins and who loses." I lifted my head, meeting her gaze. My voice was soft but resolute. "Silence, but silence with a dagger. You don't know how strong my silence can be." The room fell into a heavy stillness. Clara bit her lip, her eyes flashing with anger. She snatched her bag, grabbed the papers, and stormed out, her heels striking the wooden floor in sharp, echoing beats. That night, Harris called with news: the court had approved the temporary asset protection order. Clara was immediately cut off from accessing joint accounts, which meant every financial stream was halted. I exhaled, and for the first time in months, I felt as though I could breathe fresh air again. But the peace didn't last. Late that night, just as I had drifted into sleep, my phone buzzed non-stop. Clara's name lit up the screen. I hesitated, then answered. Her scream burst through the line. "You've ruined me. You're selfish. I've worked all my life for this, and now you want to bury me in the mud." I stayed quiet for a moment, letting her rage crash over me like violent waves. Then I spoke softly, steadily. "I'm only protecting what I have. If you think that's ruining you, then you never understood what love is." Clara shrieked, "I'll countersue you. I'll drag you into the light so everyone knows what a cruel mother you are." I closed my eyes, gripping the receiver tightly. "Go ahead. Who has the evidence?" A long silence stretched, broken only by the ticking wall clock and the patter of rain on the porch. Then Clara suddenly burst into sobs before slamming the line shut. I looked at the phone in my hand. My finger trembled as I pressed the record save button. The red light blinked, confirming the entire call had been stored. I set the phone down and drew a deep breath. This time, I was no longer shaking. Because I knew, this battle had only just begun, and I held the advantage. That night, after hanging up, I sat alone in the dark. The house was silent, broken only by the steady rain outside and the faint glow of the phone screen still lit. My heart pounded, not from fear, but from a strange new feeling. I was no longer the mother trembling before her daughter's anger. I replayed the recording. Clara's shrill, hateful voice filled the room. "You've ruined me. You're selfish." Then my own reply, low and eerily calm, "I'm only protecting what I have." I listened to myself in astonishment. Since when had I been able to face her with such resolve? The phone buzzed again. "Clara." I sighed and answered. "You think a few bank statements can hurt me?" Her voice was hoarse from crying. "I'll drag you down with me. You'll never have a peaceful day again." I replied quietly, "You don't understand. I don't want to drag you down. But I also won't let myself sink any further. On the other end came the sound of sobs, then her scream, like a cornered animal. I need money, don't you get it? Without capital, the new company will die before it even starts. I've staked everything on this. If it fails, I'll lose everything. In that moment, I realized what Harris had meant. To Clara, I wasn't her mother. I was the life preserver she grabbed whenever she felt herself drowning. But this time, I wasn't reaching out. Clara, I said slowly, I've saved you your whole life. Now you need to learn how to stand on your own. She shrieked, you're selfish. I'm your blood, and you're abandoning me. I inhaled deeply, eyes on the ticking clock. Blood doesn't mean being an unlimited credit card. You've forgotten the most important thing, love is not exploitation. On the other end, Clara went silent for a few seconds, then her sobs broke into ragged wails. And then click. The call ended abruptly. I set the phone on the table, staring at the black screen reflecting my face. My eyes were lined with wrinkles, but in them I saw something that had been dormant for years, strength. I opened a drawer, took out a small notebook and a pen, and wrote my first line in years. My daughter screams, but I choose silence. Not because I am weak, but because I understand now, silence is the dagger hidden in my sleeve. I closed the notebook, my heart astonishingly light. The next day, Harris came to my house to collect more evidence. I handed him the recording. He listened, then nodded. Very good. This is the missing piece we needed. Clara confessed herself to using the funds for her new company. This recording will strengthen our case in court. I sat across from him, my hands clasped together. Mr. Harris, I don't want to destroy Clara. I just want to protect what's left of my life. He looked at me, his eyes stern yet full of understanding. You're not destroying her. You're teaching her a lesson she's never been willing to learn. That evening, I returned to my empty house. The rain had stopped, leaving only the pungent scent of damp earth. I sat by the window, staring out into the pitch-black yard. Inside me, the pain was still there, but mixed now with a quiet calm. I remembered the years when Clara was little. Those nights I stayed awake holding her through a high fever. Those mornings I hid my own meal, saving it for her. All of it came back, bittersweet flashes of memory. And I realized, love doesn't always mean unconditional sacrifice. Sometimes, love means having the courage to say no. The clock ticked steadily, pulling me back to the present. The trial date was approaching. I knew Clara would not stop. She would fight back, try to paint me as ruthless. But I also knew I was ready. I looked down at the table. Beside the stack of files and bank statements lay the phone. Stored inside was the recording from the night before, sitting like a sharpened blade. I gave a faint smile, whispering to myself. You don't know how powerful my silence can be, my child. Outside, the drizzle began again. I closed the window and lit a small lamp. In the dim light, I sat down and wrote in my notebook, the day of trial when my daughter and I will face each other, with no illusions left to hide behind. And I knew, that trial would be a turning point not only in my life, but in Clara's as well. The trial came sooner than I expected. That morning, I put on my old brown coat, wrapped a purple scarf around my neck, and walked into the courthouse with steps both trembling and steady. The heavy wooden doors opened to a vast room with a high ceiling, long wooden benches, and cold white light pouring in through tall windows. The solemn atmosphere made it hard to breathe. Clara was already there. She sat across the room in a sleek business suit, carefully made up. My daughter, or rather, the defendant before the court, still carried herself with the same confidence, as if the world revolved around her. When our eyes met, she gave me a thin smile, her gaze full of challenge. The judge entered. The gavel struck thud. And the sound echoed straight into my chest. Harris sat beside me, a thick folder of documents laid before him. He leaned slightly, whispering, "Stay calm. Just listen and nod when I prompt you." I took a deep breath and gave a slight nod. The hearing began. Clara's lawyer stood first, his voice booming. "Your Honor, my client, Miss Clara Smith, was simply entrusted by her mother and given joint ownership. Every financial transaction was made with Mrs. Harper's consent. This was voluntary, with no coercion." Hearing that, my chest burned with outrage. But I held it in, exactly as Harris had told me. Silent. Then Harris rose. He opened the folder, his voice slow but commanding. "Your Honor, we have clear evidence that Ms. Clara exploited joint ownership rights to take out secondary loans, divert funds into her personal accounts, and invest in her husband's company, all without Mrs. Harper's knowledge or true consent." He placed a small USB drive on the evidence table, then turned on the projector. Bank statements, loan contracts, spreadsheets appeared on the screen. Every figure, every arrow tracing the flow of money, laid bare before the court. I could hear murmurs ripple through the audience seats. Harris's voice hardened. "We also have a recorded phone call in which Ms. Clara herself admits to using family capital to start her private company. Please listen." The sound filled the courtroom, Clara's desperate voice, hoarse from crying, "I need money, don't you understand, Mom? Without capital, the new company will die before it even begins." The entire room went silent. I sat motionless, only nodding slightly when Harris turned to me. My heart ached hearing it again, but at the same time, I felt a release. The truth was no longer buried. Clara's lawyer quickly objected, insisting it was just an outburst of despair. But Harris cut in. This was not love. This was disguised exploitation. And it was systematic, deliberate, not a moment of weakness. The judge reflected, reviewing each piece of evidence, then addressed me. "Mrs. Harper, do you confirm that you had no knowledge of these transactions?" I stood, my legs trembling but my voice clear. "Yes, Your Honor. I had no knowledge. I only believed I was signing papers for tax convenience, as my daughter told me. I never consented to turning my life savings into capital for someone else." I paused, glancing at Clara. She lowered her head, fingers clutching the edge of her skirt. The gavel struck again. "After reviewing the evidence, the court hereby annuls all of Ms. Clara Smith's signing authority over joint assets with Mrs. Harper Smith. Furthermore, the court imposes mandatory financial supervision on all transactions by Ms. Clara for the next 6 months." Thud. The sound rang out once more. I exhaled, my shoulders loosening after months of suffocating weight. Harris squeezed my hand gently, whispering, "You've won the first step." I sat back down, tears streaming, but they were no longer tears of pain. They were tears of vindication. Across the aisle, I saw Clara bow her head, her hair falling to cover half her face. The white light from the windows streamed down onto me, while her seat remained in shadow. I knew this moment would mark a turning point. Outside, as the trial ended, I heard the buzz of reporters, cameras flashing non-stop. Headlines would appear soon enough. I pulled my purple scarf tighter, lifted my head, and walked on. Inside, I whispered to myself, silence is not surrender. It is strength when the truth speaks on its own. Only 2 days after the trial, the very thing I feared most came true. My name and Clara's appeared on the front page of the city's biggest financial newspaper. The bold headline read, "Executive Clara Smith sued by her own mother for financial exploitation." I sat in the kitchen, a cold cup of tea before me, my eyes fixed on those words. Never in my life had I thought that my motherhood would one day become fodder for the public. Yet instead of humiliation, I felt only a sorrow mixed with quiet relief. At last, the truth was out in the open. The phone rang non-stop. Neighbors, old friends, even former colleagues at the hospital called, shocked and curious. I just repeated one sentence, "Let the court decide everything." Then I hung up, keeping my heart quiet. Meanwhile, at Clara's office, the real storm broke. I learned from Harris he'd gotten inside information. On the morning the papers came out, co-workers clustered together to read, whispering behind her back. The admiring looks turned into scrutiny and suspicion. An employee recounted that Clara walked into the conference room with an icy face, trying to act normal. But no one could focus on her presentation anymore. They murmured, secretly opened their phones, and read the news. Someone even deliberately placed the newspaper right on the table so the words, "sued by her own mother," pointed straight at her. I pictured Clara, my daughter, standing in that room. All those years she had built the image of a strong, successful woman, now collapsing because of a naked truth. I felt a pang of pity, but I also knew, this was the price of deceit. That afternoon, I went to her office. Not to comfort her, but to face her. When I stepped in, Clara was sitting alone in her glass-walled office. A stack of newspapers lay on the desk, their bold headlines untouched. She looked up, eyes swollen red. "Mom, why did you have to do this?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. I looked straight at her. "I warned you. You didn't listen. I didn't want to take you to court, but you forced me. You turned me into a shadow, a name to sign for your debts. Did you think I would stay silent forever?" Clara let out a bitter laugh. "You've won. My reputation is ruined. They'll never look at me the same." I stepped forward, set the paper on the desk, and pointed to the bold type. "A reputation bought with lies collapses quickly. You destroyed it yourself, not me." She fell silent, her eyes blurring. I saw Clara's shoulders tremble, then she slumped over the desk and covered her face. In that moment, I no longer saw a cold executive, nor a deft manipulator. I saw the daughter who used to cry in my arms when she fell off her bike or got a bad grade. But the difference was this: I knew that if I reached out to hold her this time, I would step back into the old vicious circle. I turned and walked away. Behind me, her sobs echoed together with the ticking wall clock, sounding like a countdown to collapse. The next day, Clara's company issued a statement. They would launch an internal investigation. Investors demanded a clear accounting of cash flows. Clara was suspended from her position pending the results. The news spread across the papers, followed by analysis and commentary. I read it all, sitting in my old house, the yellow light spilling over the wooden table. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel pain anymore either. I felt only a heavy silence. Perhaps this was exactly what Harris had meant: justice doesn't need to shout, it only needs evidence. Late at night, as I was putting away the teapot, there was a knock at the door. I opened it, and there stood Clara. No more glamorous dresses, no more makeup to hide behind. Just a tired face and eyes swollen from crying. "Mom," she choked, unable to say more. I looked at her for a long time. My heart swayed, but then I remembered everything: the cheap purple bouquet humiliated at the party, the loan contracts I never knew about, and that cold sentence at her promotion celebration: "You shouldn't be here, I only sent you an invitation out of pity." I answered softly, evenly, "If you want to talk, let's do it tomorrow. Tonight, I need quiet." I closed the door, leaving her standing in the dark hallway. For the first time, I didn't let my softness make me collapse. The next day, I chose a small park on the outskirts as the place to meet Clara. I needed an open space, not the four tight walls of a courtroom or an office. In the late afternoon, yellow leaves covered the path, and the chilly breeze slipped through my gray hair. I sat on an old stone bench, my familiar purple scarf around my shoulders, waiting. Clara arrived late. She walked slowly toward me, her shoulders thin and hunched, her eyes adrift. No more confidence, no trace of a director. Before me was just a panicked, exhausted daughter. "Mom," her voice shook, "save me this one last time. Please. If you don't help me, I'll lose everything." I looked at her for a long time. So many years of love, so many concessions. I'd heard this line countless times: just this once. And every time I yielded. But this time, another voice rose in my heart, enough. I shook my head gently. I've saved you all your life. Now you have to stand up on your own. Clara burst into tears, dropping to her knees in front of me, clutching at my coat. Don't abandon me, Mom. I promise just this once. The new company will change everything. I'll give everything back to you. I placed my hand on her shoulder but didn't pull her up. I spoke slowly, each word clear. Love is not an unlimited credit card, Clara. I've given you more than anyone. But you only know how to withdraw, not to return. It's time to stop. She screamed, you're heartless. You want to watch me fall. I turned my face toward the row of trees, leaves spinning away in the wind. I don't want you to fall. But I can't let you drag me down with you. If you don't learn this lesson, you'll never stand on your own 2 feet. Clara let go, collapsing, her tears soaking into the ground. I stood up and turned to leave. This time, my legs did not tremble. Before I left, I set an envelope on the stone bench, right beside her. Inside are the papers severing all co-ownership between us. From now on, you and I have no financial ties. You're free. But it also means I will no longer be your life preserver. Clara looked up, horror in her eyes. She grabbed the envelope and opened it with shaking hands. Inside, each page was black and white, unambiguous. She looked at me, her lips quivering, unable to form words. I walked on. Behind me, I heard her heart-rending sobs. They sounded like a child being abandoned, but I knew that if I turned back to hold her again, everything would repeat. I am old, I no longer have the strength to pay the price again. The wind picked up. My purple scarf snapped and fluttered on my shoulders like a flag signaling finality. I walked straight toward the end of the path, where the sunset spread out in a blazing glow. That night, I sat alone in the old house. The yellow lamp cast its glow across the wooden table, and the old envelope was gone from my hands. I closed my eyes, remembering the moment Clara had fallen to her knees, her shoulders trembling uncontrollably. My heart still ached, but it was no longer numb. I told myself, being a mother doesn't mean chaining yourself in shackles. Love also needs boundaries. And today, I built those boundaries. When I looked up, in the window's reflection was the image of a gray-haired woman, her eyes lined with wrinkles, but her gaze strangely serene. I knew, this time, I had truly set myself free. The next morning, I woke as the first light of dawn spread. Pale golden light filled the small room, spilling across the stained walls. This familiar space had once suffocated me, but today, it felt unusually warm as though for the first time in years, I was free to breathe. I brewed a fresh pot of tea. No longer the cold, forgotten tea left to languish on the table. I sat by the window, opened my little notebook, and wrote the first line of the day, silence is not weakness. It is a weapon when needed. In the past, I believed I had to speak out, argue, scream, just to be heard by my daughter. But in the end, it was steady silence that became the mirror of truth. Clara could deny, she could reject, but before the court, before the public, the truth spoke for itself. I decided to join the yoga class Camila had once suggested. On my first day in the studio, I saw faces marked by age, silver hair, but eyes bright with vitality. Together, we breathed, we stretched. Each slow movement felt like it was peeling away another layer of lingering burden. That evening, I opened my old laptop. It had been a long time since I'd felt inspired to type. I began a small manuscript titled, Protecting Finances in Old Age. I wanted to tell my story not to disgrace my daughter, but to prevent other mothers from falling into the trap of blind sacrifice. I wanted them to know, love does not mean signing blindly onto any paper their children hand them. Day by day, the manuscript grew. I sent the first few chapters to Camila. After reading, she clasped my hand, Harper, you didn't just save yourself, you'll save many others." Hearing that, my heart warmed. One morning, my phone buzzed. A message flashed on the screen: "Mom, I'm sorry. I was wrong. But I don't know where to start. Clara." I read it over and over. My heart wavered, but then I set the phone down. I didn't reply. I knew that if I answered immediately, everything would fall back into the old cycle. This silence was not born of resentment, but to let my daughter face the consequences herself. That afternoon, Harris called me. "Good news, Harper. The court has issued its final decision. All of your assets are fully protected. Clara no longer has any rights to interfere." I sat still, tears falling, but they were tears of relief. After years of burden, I had finally secured the fruits of my life for myself. I thanked him, my voice trembling but steady. That night, I opened the drawer and took out the old photo frame, the graduation picture of Clara I had once treasured. I looked at it for a long time, then smiled softly. It was no longer a smile of pain, but of release. I placed the frame back in the drawer and closed it. The past would always be there, but it no longer bound me. Outside the window, the sunset burned the sky red. I sat down and opened my new journal. The last line of the day flowed gently onto the page. "I don't need to shout to be heard. Silence carries farther than any cry. And I, at last, have learned how to be silent without losing myself." I closed the notebook and drew a long breath. In the little apartment, golden light spread warmly, birds chirped in the evening distance. I felt as though I had stepped into another life, a life where I was the master, no longer a shadow controlled by my daughter. Silence, it turned out, was the very definition of strength. Some of the bonds we consider most sacred can too easily become chains binding us in illusion. This story is a reminder that motherhood does not equal unconditional sacrifice. Love must exist within boundaries so both sides can value it, otherwise, it will be exploited and twisted into a burden. Sometimes, silence is not submission, it is the strongest way to protect yourself. True strength does not lie in endlessly saving others, but in daring to keep hold of your own life.